Greetings all, Ferrariman601 here. Welcome back to Assetto Corsa, and welcome back to another review. It's been a while, I know. Life happens. However, something else has happened somewhat recently in the sim racing universe as far as Assetto Corsa is concerned. This from VRC, the VRC Beamer V12. Yes, this is the latest installment in their historic. Can we call it historic? Yeah, I guess we can now. It's 20-something years ago now. Oh, dear. From VRC's historic prototype series, the Beamer V12. Yes, what is this car? Well, first of all, I will say that this car was something that a lot of people, including myself, wanted in Assetto Corsa for a very long time, considering that the last time that I drove this car was on Project Cars 2. And then before that, it was on Gran Turismo 4. I remember having this car in that game. Was it in GT3? It might have been in GT3. That was 01, and this car in his real world guise as the BMW V12 LMR. This car debuted in 1999 in what is now the World Endurance Championship and the American Le Mans Series, which is now IMSA. But it might have been in that game. I don't know. Irrelevant point. Regardless, it's here. It's the Beamer V12 from VRC. When you see VRC's name attached to any Assetto Corsa mod, you know that you're going to get into something that is quite spectacular in terms of its capability, but also quite spectacular in terms of the amount of detail and care that has been put into crafting every aspect of it. It is a really good one from a really good modding team. Of course, VRC and Race Sim Studio, they're pseudo-competitor, I guess you can say, but those guys have a very good working relationship, as I have a good working relationship with both of these teams, and it's always great to see one of them release a new product, and, well, we have a new product from one of the premier Assetto Corsa modders, and it's great to see. The Beamer V12, what is it? Well, we already said it's a BMW V12 LMR. Le Mans prototype, you would call this LMP1 these days, but it was not called LMP1 back then. What is it? What was it? What did it do? Why did it exist? Well, it is a Le Mans prototype racing car. As you can see, rather different from the Le Mans prototypes that we know today. Most predominantly, you can see that we have an open cockpit on this thing. Yes, when I hear Le Mans prototype, this is what I think of. This is my mental archetype for what a Le Mans prototype should be. They are no longer, and it's a tragedy. And I really wish that we could have open cockpit sports cars. Would you call this a sports car? It was in sports car racing. Wish we could have open cockpit race cars, period, other than open wheelers once again. Because so many great cars from this era. Obviously, you've got the V12 LMR. You have the Audi R8. You've got the Ferrari 333 SP, which would also be something really cool to see in Assetto Corsa. Please, another glorious V12 engine in that thing. However, this is a great car just aesthetically and in terms of its planning, the way that it's configured. I love it. All for that. But in the real world, the V12 LMR, it was a Le Mans prototype racing car that was designed by BMW between 1999 and 2000. It would have been competing, really. Of course, it was designed to compete in the 24 Hours of Le Mans, but also it did run in what was then the American Le Mans Series. And it was born out of, not a stillborn project, but a somewhat unsuccessful project by BMW from 1998, in which they ran a car called the V12 LM, and this really is a revolution, I guess. I don't entirely know what the R stands for, but it's an evolution of the V12 LM. Superficially, it looks somewhat similar, as you would expect, only a couple years removed from the designs of those two cars, but much improved, and it was improved enough to win the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Indeed, it was. When did it win the 24 Hours of Le Mans? It won it in 1999. First overall and first in class, the car number 15, piloted by Yannick Delma, Pierluigi Martini, and Joachim Winkelhock. So, yes, he's the brother of Manfred Winkelhock, who is the father of Marcus Winkelhock, who started last and first in the 2007 European Grand Prix at the Nürburgring. So, we have a Winkelhock connection to this car. Under the skin, what did we have going on with this thing? Well, very late 20th century engineering. We had Formula One doing all carbon fiber cars by this point, and of course, sports car racing. They were hot on their heels. So the overall chassis, it's a monocoque. It's carbon fiber and aluminum honeycomb. So just like you had in a Formula One car in this era, and just like you still have in a Formula One car today, you've got a monocoque which consists of the cockpit and all of your hard points for mounting the suspension and the engine. So underneath all of this bodywork with these swooping, sweeping curves and vents and louvers all over the place, you've effectively got a Formula One car underneath here, but not one from 1999. More like one from 1989, 1990. Why? Well, we've got a V12 engine in the center of this thing, mounted just behind the cockpit and the fuel tank, just like in a Formula One car, a V12 mid-mounted, longitudinally mounted, naturally aspirated, displacing 5990 on the CC meter there. That engine specifically was the BMW S70-3, officially displacing 5.99 liters to hit that 6-liter displacement limit there. V12 engine sounds absolutely glorious, revs out to about 8,000 RPM as well. We'll hear that a little bit later on. Mated to that V12 engine, though, we had an X-Track gearbox in this thing. It's a 6-speed, and it is a manual sequential. It is not a paddle shift. It is not an H pattern. It is a manual gearbox shifted sequentially with a lever and a clutch pedal. Yeah, that's what we have in this car. And we'll get into some of the idiosyncrasies of driving this particular car, but in general, some cars that are equipped with a gearbox like that, because there are a couple things that are a little bit different in terms of how you have to control it, how you interface with it, and all that. But pretty self-explanatory once you see it in action. According to BMW, the real-world car was producing between 580 and 590 horsepower out of that, give or take, 6-liter V12 engine, using Petrobras fuel in the era and running on Michelin tires in the era as well. It was entered officially in international competition by BMW Motorsport, the factory team, as well as Schnitzer Motorsport, who at the time was basically a subsidiary of the BMW factory team. Some people who drove this car, you will recognize basically all of these names. If you're a fan of sports car racing, you have J.J. Leto, Jörg Müller, Steve Soper, Jochen Winkelhock, Pierluigi Martini, Yannick Dalmat, Tom Christensen, yeah, he drove this car. Bill Oberlin also drove this car, and Jean-Marc Gunon also drove this car. It made its debut at the 1999 12 Hours of Sebring. Its last season was in 2000. Didn't quite have the same sort of success in 2000 as it did in 1999. However, out of 18 entries, it scored 7 victories, 4 pole positions, and 3 fastest laps. It did not take any Constructors or Drivers' Championships in either season, but it did win that 1999 24 Hours of Le Mans, and it cemented the car's place in history. That initial project, the V12 LM, did not bring BMW the success that they had hoped. However, they followed it up a year later, and they took victory. So that's a brilliant story, and that is mission accomplished if you are BMW. Much like they did in Formula One, they won the Canadian Grand Prix in 2008, and then they started ratcheting back that Formula One program before it completely died in 2009. Similar story here in terms of BMW building Le Mans prototypes. They won the race, and then they ratcheted back the support until we get the situation that we're in today, where BMW is exclusively running GT3 class cars. A little bit of a shame. I would like to see BMW really aiming at the top of the world, be it in sports car racing or formula racing. Okay, they did that Formula E thing, but we won't talk about that. However, what do we have from VRC as far as this car is concerned? Well, according to Content Manager, we are producing 580 horsepower, so that's right on the money in terms of what BMW say the car should have had. That 580 horsepower comes at the flavor of 670 newton-meters of torque. So that rear axle over there, even though you got these big sticky tires at the back, the Majestic tires, it must be said, yep, you're going to spin them if you're not careful. Power-to-weight ratio is 1.55 kilograms per horsepower per Content Manager. And the model on this thing, we have 136 total objects, and they are comprised of 230,284 triangles. So we often talk about polygon counts in terms of trying to gauge the macrocosmic quality of a model in Assetto Corsa. This is pretty high up there. Yes, I've seen higher counts, but if it's not strictly necessary, why make it needlessly complex? You can see that there is still plenty of detail here on this car, inside and out, and I'm certainly not going to be complaining about any of that. Generally, though, what is a car like this trying to do aerodynamically? It's markedly different from an open-wheeler, as you would expect. Its mechanical layout is very similar to an open-wheeler. We've got pushrod suspension front and rear on this thing. We've got the engine and driveline being a stressed member in the construction. We've got the suspension wishbones and dampers out the back mounted to the top of the gearbox casing. So, you know, it's macrocosmically similar to things that we all know and love quite well. But when you throw all this bodywork on top of it, now you have a whole bunch of other possibilities that don't exist on an open wheeler because regulations don't allow it, and it's not an open wheeler if it doesn't have open wheels. This is not an open wheeler because it doesn't have open wheels, which, you know, is kind of important to make that distinction. But what's happening here is we're trying to turn the car into a wing. Just like we saw in the ground effect era in Formula One in the late 70s through the mid-80s, that's what they're doing here. A little bit different from what Formula One is doing now in their return of the ground effect era, because it's not 100% unadulterated ground effect, because there's still a lot of topside aero going on, and they've got tunnels versus just making the car one big tunnel underneath, but I digress. Here, we're playing a lot with ground effect, because this car has a flat bottom, and we have a massive diffuser out the back. What we're doing here is, you'll notice that we have no front wing to speak of. At least no traditional front wing. The whole front of the car is a wing. This top side bodywork is designed to generate downforce at speed, and you can see just generally with the shape of this thing, you've got that wedge shape. You're going to be getting some positive pressure across the top of the car, which then is going to create a negative pressure underneath because you've diverted air up, which means that you get a partial vacuum below, which means that you get push effect on top and suck effect on the bottom. Underneath the front end of the car, you also have barge boards, really. They're entirely enclosed here, as you can see, but you've got barge boards in this center section, and what that serves to do, just like they do on a Formula One car, is they take air that's coming in through the front end of the car, and then they lower its pressure by changing its direction as it passes through these ducts right up through here, and some of these go to brake cooling as well, but the air passes through some of these ducts. It also passes underneath the car, and then it gets scooped up and then shot out the side here. So you're creating negative pressure underneath the front end like so, which means downforce. Similarly, toward the center section of the car, you see these two big air intakes on either side of the nose. What are they doing? Well, if we follow one of them through, you can see it gets dark. However, you've got radiators in here, quite obviously, completely blanked off now with all the bodywork. But there'd be radiators in here, and they would exhaust out, partially out these NACA ducts. At least they would serve to accelerate the air. But you've got a lot of exhaust being routed underneath and then out this diffuser. So you've got a lot of stuff happening inside the car as well as underneath, and of course the traditional flat bottom floor, meaning you just go underneath. You get a lot of compression as you go through here, which means that the airflow has to accelerate to fit through the smaller gap. When air accelerates, its relative pressure drops, and then it gets shot out the back through the expansion zone of the diffuser, where the pressure drops yet more, and you get more downforce that way. So absolutely great. But no traditional wings on the front end or really anywhere else on a car. The rear wing, it's basically there just to trim the amount of pitch that you would get front to rear because of that under tray going on. You'll see the rear wing, it has a relatively shallow angle to it, and it's mounted very far rear. It's well beyond the rear axle here, unlike on, say, a Formula One car where the rear wing is basically right on top of the rear axle. Here, it's well removed behind this little bit of a long tail section, I suppose you could call it. Top side, though, in addition to all of these air intakes, you've just got a lot of flat surface area. Of course, you do have the cockpit here, and you've got these big mirror stalks, which are going to be causing quite a lot of turbulence. You've also got this roll hoop, which is also going to be causing a lot of turbulence. But you're keeping things very simple and flat and straight and level here. Why are you doing this? Twofold. Number one, the more winglets you have on top, the more drag you create, which means the more straight line speed you don't have. And if you're on a circuit like Le Mans, where you have the Mulsanne straight, you want that straight line speed. So keep things as quiet as you can, relatively speaking. But particularly from the midsection rearward. You can see that we start to begin this slope downward. What's happening here? We are entraining air through the rear section of this car to blow it out through the rear wing and then out the back. Why are we doing this? We're energizing flow from the diffuser as well. So we're creating downforce with all of the surfaces on this car, but we're not doing it necessarily with wings, at least in the traditional sense. It's pretty cool stuff, and again, very cool to see that here modeled so nicely by VRC. You'll notice a slight asymmetry in the car on the top side. Why? Well, over here we have got the big Snorkel intake for the V12 engine. Can we follow this down? No, we're blanked off through here. But generally, you could see what the path of this would be as we morph into the model. The engine is not really modeled in here, but you could just generally see the trajectory of all of that. Obviously, the engine is mounted right here, dead center, and you can see a big cover for the intake plenum on the engine here. But that's generally what it is. Your gearbox would be in this area, your wishbones from the rear axle would be in this area, and then your transaxle differential would be in this area as well. Obviously, quad exhaust, we got 2 banks of 6 cylinders, so they need to breathe. You've got a starter hole, and this is probably a breather for the coolant overflow trap, I would say. Just blow that back out onto the racetrack if you get an overpressure event. Other than that, though, that's what you got on this car from the outside. Looking into the brakes here, big carbon discs, just like you would have on a Formula One car in this era. Center hub there with just a single wheel nut. That looks nice. And then, of course, big slick tires all around, wrapped in the magnesium rim. So real cool stuff. I like the detail inside. You can see the bleed valve for the brakes there, the spacer around the wheel hub to hold the disc in place, and then of course it says VRC Racing on the front calipers at very least. The rears probably say that as well. Yes, they do. Cool. Little barcodes on tires, little embossed lettering as you can see right there. Some chalk marks. And then, of course, the Majestic logo, because we can't say Michelin, because that's a trademark. But real cool stuff here on this car thus far. Looking into the cockpit, what do we have? Well, you'll see that, in theory, there is room for a second seat in this car. Why? Tradition. Never let progress get in the way of tradition. These cars, technically speaking, have to be able to accommodate 2 people. Why? Again, tradition. But this is the driver's seat. Pretty nicely modeled here. Carbon fiber. No padding to speak of, so this would hurt after a while. But nice carbon fiber seat molding there. A little electronics box in there. There's a chassis plate car, Beamer V12, chassis number C03-99. Engine is the Beamer V12 P75. Cool. 1999, number 3, 24 hours race. Obviously, we can't say 24 hours of Le Mans either because, you know, trademark sensor unit with a little inventory sticker on it, or patent sticker, really. Little lines, VRC technology, 50, serial number 0027. Cool. I like all of this. Auxiliary instrument panel there, master switch, electric kill, fuel reset. Start, probably a start map for the engine. Fire bottle, discharge there, I would guess. Brake bias adjuster would be underneath. Engine map, rev limit map, cool. Another button box here, brake bias to front and rear. Mirrors, yep, power mirrors on this car, believe it or not. That's really cool. And then into the footwell, here's where the passenger, in theory, would be. And then over here, we do have pedals. Real hard to see them because it's dark in here, but throttle, brake, and clutch where you would expect them to be. Nice. Get up top here, around the roll hoop section. We have got the steering wheel, very nicely appointed. No paddles on this thing, and it doesn't even have a hard connect in the steering column. It just has the quick release, but all the electrical power and electrical interface comes through this wire. That's how far we have come in these days. But pretty nicely appointed steering wheel. Nothing too crazy in terms of screens or anything like that on the wheel itself. We do have a dashboard that does have a couple LCD units on it, but just 6 buttons on the steering wheel. Radio, scroll for your pages on the dash, flash the headlights, pit lane speed limiter, a wet map for the engine, and probably traction control. and then a dimmer as well, probably to adjust the brightness of the dash display itself. Shift lights up top there on a binnacle, and then the instrument panel. When this is alive, it's going to show us gear position in the top center section. It's going to show us our speed readout. We're going to be reading out in clicks, engine RPM, fuel level, and water temperature, and that's about everything that you need. Over here we have some switches, which are actually animated. The driver is animated. When you turn the lights on and off, the driver will reach over with his left hand and hit one of these buttons, so that's pretty cool. And then over here, we've got a gear lever. Yep, this is something that is very sadly missing for most high-level race cars these days, an actual lever to swap cogs. I love it. And it's a sequential box, as we mentioned. There is the linkage that goes back through the firewall in the back of the monocoque into the engine. But real cool stuff. Absolutely great details inside and out on this car. Really cool to see VRC finally bringing this car into Assetto Corsa, because it's been a long time coming. I've been a long admirer of this era of prototype racing, as I mentioned off the top, and we've now got a V12 powered prototype. It's real cool. The car does come with a number of liveries. They are all just standard VRC liveries. Some of you who are members of the VRC Discord, you had the opportunity to put your name on this car. As you can see up here, the names will be around a roll hoop area, so there are 3 names per car on most of these liveries, with, of course, the national flags. Very nice to see all of that stuff. But as we can go through here, we can scroll, and you can see the different liveries here. What does the blue flag mean? Ha! The blue flag means go faster. Cool stuff. Obviously, they are trying to parody some of the real-world liveries that the car would have raced in. This looks pretty similar to the BMW factory livery from '99, but obviously don't say that. Red, another red, black, green, yeah, and then we can go the other way and show you the one other livery after the number 43. Loud Noises Audio Systems. Yup, I love that. this also somewhat resembles one of the liveries that I seem to remember seeing the real-world car in, but maybe not. We're going to be running this one because it's got my name on it, number 43. I like it a lot, and I like driving this car a lot, which is something that we ought to get on with. So stand by for some driving. Welcome to Road America, courtesy of the great Assetto Corsa track modder, Lilski. Before we get out on track, though, let's take a look through the setup screen and show you what's what here on the VRC Beamer V12. First of all, as is traditional on every Assetto Corsa car, we get to our gear screen first. First through 6th gear in the forward ratios, plus your final drive. Reverse is not adjustable, but hopefully you never have to use reverse, so it doesn't matter. Anyway, all default gear ratios shown here. You can adjust all of these to your heart's content. Tires, we have 2 tire compounds to choose from. We have hard and soft. We're going to run on the hards here for our first run. Tire pressures on all 4 corners here. Default is 25 PSI. We have a range of adjustment from 22 to 30, so not all that great of an adjustment range, but there you go. Fuel, it is zeroed out to keep the engine quiet, but the maximum fuel capacity is 90 liters, as you can see there, and the engine fires up momentarily. Aero, here's where some of the fun starts. We have a lot of options on this car, visually as well as aerodynamically. On the default setup here, you can see that we have got these louvers over the front wheels. This is to vent some excess air so that we don't get too much positive pressure underneath the front end, and therefore we can have V1 rotate going on here down the long straights. You can close those louvers off if you so desire with step 1 there on the louvers setting. Dive planes, similarly, we do have some dive planes here on the flanks of the front end here. We can entirely remove those if we want to step 0, or we can add a second set of dive planes with step 2. And of course, all of that is modeled technically as well as visually. Finally, the rear wing. We mentioned that the rear wing doesn't do all that much on this car because it is rather shallow. However, you can see that we can change the visual angle of attack on that rear wing as we ratchet through the settings between 0 and 20. Step 10 is the default there, about 50%. Alignment, camber, and toe on all 4 corners. Default value shown here. You can play with this as much as you would like. Dampers, bound and rebound on all 4 corners here. No high speed, low speed adjust, just straight up bound and rebound there. Drivetrain, differential settings here in Power Coast and Preload. This is your default. I like to open up the diff quite a lot, so we'll be changing this later on. Generic, brake bias, 55% to the front. Maximum to the front is 60%, and minimum to the front is 50%. I'll go back to default there. Brake power, 100%, and then FFB linearity. This is a setting that is unique to this car and maybe a handful of others, but I really don't know what it does, but it defaults to 80. Maximum range is 200, and then the minimum range is 0. I'm not entirely sure what that is really supposed to be doing, and I won't touch it. Suspension, your travel ranges on all 4 corners there. Your second suspension screen, anti-roll bars front and rear, as well as ride heights and wheel rates on all 4 corners. Visuals, VRC, they are renowned for adding visual options to the cars. Central light here, you may have noticed in showroom view that we have this blanking panel here. We can open that up and we can get a central light, just a little extra headlight for those 24-hour races or any race that's going into darkness, really. I like that. As well as RPM lights. If we go into the cockpit here, you will see that we don't have any shift lights clearly visible. They are there, but they're behind the top rim of that steering wheel. If we go to step 1 on the RPM lights, now you can see that we have got some shift lights just barely visible on top of the steering wheel now. If we go into our free cam view, perhaps we can see that a little bit more clearly. So we go forward. There we are. If I go to step 0, they go back down to an area where we can't see them from my particular vantage point. But if we go to step 1, now we can see them again. VRC, they like to do things like this on their cars, and I really do appreciate it because it just allows that little bit of extra customization, and if you don't happen to like a particular thing about how the car is physically set up visually, you can change it, and I like that. That was something that I first noted on VRC's McLaren MP44, which is now an ancient mod from 2016, I want to say that happened. So I do like that VRC were pioneers in these visual adjustments that you can make in a car setup. I really do like that. However, we're on default setup. We're on the hard tires, though. That's not a default option. I've changed that for myself. We're going to put some gas on board and just see what it does. We're going to put 30 liters in the tank. We're going to go in the cockpit here, and we'll run through the instrument panel real quick. Now that the car is alive, what do we see on this instrument panel? We see we have got our gear position indicator up top there, front and center, currently in neutral. If I go up through the box, you see everything, of course, going up into 4th, 5th, 6th, and then down, of course, through the box back into neutral, and then reverse. Cool. To the left, that's 0. That is our speed in kilometers per hour. To the right, that 30L, that's our fuel level, 30 liters. 1850, that is the engine RPM, as you can see. And then to the right of that on the bottom line, water temperature showing 66°C at the moment. And that covers the instrumentation on a car. One other thing that I want to show you in here, we mentioned in showroom view that the headlights, the driver is animated in that headlight on-off function. If I turn the lights on, there you go, he reaches down and hits the switch. And now we've got the blue lights on the left side of the dash. Hit the button again, he turns the lights off, those blue lights go out, and you see the left arm animation. That's really cool, very nice touch. Again, a similar animation there on VRC's McLaren MP44, which I hope gets an update someday. But regardless, that's what we have here in the car in terms of instrumentation. Not a whole lot going on in terms of information going to you. If you want to see your lap time or any deltas, you got to go into the UI and bring up some HUD elements. However, the only HUD element that we'll really be using today is the pedal display in the lower left, as you can see, as always. Stone cold tires, we'll see how they come up to temperature. They're really hard, but let's just see how this car goes in this initial run. We'll get it warmed up. First gear, bring in some revs, let the clutch out. We're rolling. Out of the pits. Real deliberate bringing this thing up to temperature. No tire warmers being used here. You can use them if you want. I just don't particularly like them. In the 6th gear, 5,000 revs. 6,000. There we go. Hello, V12. How are you today? Of course, not really pushing the car for anything at the moment, just trying to start to build some brake temperature. Got to build some tire temperature as well through the carousel. Probably the signature corner here at Road America. And then the kink, once we really get going, this will be flat. And into Bill Mitchell to close out the lap. All right, starting to get some semblance of temperature now. Lots of understeer from that front axle, as we're still not quite there, of course. Oh yeah, still lots of understeer there. Again, the hardest tires. No warmers. But it'll start to come to you. It's on its way. All right, starting to feel like it's about 85, 90% there. And I suppose we can start to speak more representatively now of what the car does. Coming down a straight here, just starting to nudge 300 clicks before we got to jump on the old binders. Into turn one. Yep, feedback's a whole lot better now from that front end. Still some understeer, as you might expect, on the hard tires, but they're starting to grip now, giving me what I want. Brakes are now pretty grabby. Very nice. Slightly off camber under the Corvette bridge. You'd always expect some understeer there. But with things more or less warmed up now, everything more or less happy, what's it doing? What information is it giving me? Well, aside from the understeer across the front axle that we would expect on a harder tires, pretty stable, I've got to say. Just on default setup. Is the kink flat? Yep, the kink is now flat. Pretty good feedback here through the steering. Force feedback is direct and crisp. There are no strange jarring moments, nothing that's really surprising there. Force feedback is not particularly strong, but it is definitely clear. You know exactly what that front axle is doing. And of course, a lot of that is going to be dependent on your individual settings in terms of your equipment, as well as just the adjustments that you make to it to suit your personal preferences. Now, through my TSPC, and I'm running the stock butterfly rim. Feels good. The other thing that I should note about my setup, and it'll bring us neatly into the transmission on this car, I'm using paddles right now. I don't really have the capacity to set up the gear lever that I've got, the H-pattern shifter, the TH8A. I don't really have the capacity to set that up sequentially. I've tried it, never quite been happy with the results, so I don't use it. However, you will notice, and it's one of the reasons that we're running the pedal trace in the lower left, you'll notice what I am doing with my inputs, particularly on the gear changes. When we started out, you saw that I was using the clutch pretty much every time up and down, and now I have stopped using the clutch, but we are still manipulating the throttle up and down. Why am I doing this? Well, I should start off by saying that it is not strictly necessary in this car to lift on the upshifts. As you can see, as we go from 4th to 5th, I'll do it. I can just upshift from 4th into 5th, no problem. I can do the same thing from 5th into 6th, and it slots into gear, not a problem. I am also blipping the throttle manually on the downshifts. That is neither strictly necessary. As we head into the final corner, we'll just do some off-throttle downshifts. And you can see it will downshift without any sort of throttle manipulation. So then why am I lifting for the upshifts and why am I blipping on the downshifts? Well, just because it is possible to do it flat or without a blip does not necessarily mean that you should. While you don't necessarily see a problem in your upshifts if you keep it flat to the floor, I don't feel that it sounds particularly well. Coming out of here onto the infield straight, we'll just do it flat. See for yourself. Really, on those upshifts, you're just hearing the engine change revs, and it's not really what you would have gotten from a car like this. You would have heard a distinct break in engine power delivery, you would have had the gear change happen, and then the engine would crack back on full song as the next gear came in. That's something that was either done through the ECU controlling the throttles electronically, or would have been done manually by the driver in a similar manner to what I'm doing by lifting on those upshifts. Although this mod will support flat shifting, I don't feel that it's the most authentic way to do it. Therefore, I'm not going to do flat shifting, simply because I think it sounds better to lift. I like to hear that break-in drive, and then I like to hear that engine crack back in with full power. You also get a brief interruption in the gearbox noise behind you when you do that. And again, I just think it sounds better. On the downshifts, though, why blip? Well, the car does not have an auto blip. Whether you're using your sequential stick, as you really should, or if you're using paddles like I am, it will just go down into the next gear, and if you're braking really hard, you do have a possibility, a distinct one at that, of locking your rear axle, which of course is going to lead you into a spin pretty quickly. You blip on that downshift, you're raising the revs to get them more in line with what they're going to be when the next gear engages, and therefore you're going to have a smoother transition into the next gear, which means far less of a chance of locking that rear axle, which means more stability under braking, and you're going to be in a better position for your turn-in. Again, you don't have to do it, but if you find yourself spinning a lot in this car, start trying to do that. Rev match those downshifts, and you're going to see a big improvement. Doesn't take a big blip, as you can see, just a little stab on the gas on the way down, and it works just fine. Through neither the upshift or downshift, once you're really underway, must you use the clutch. You can if you want, obviously. Doesn't make a difference, but, you know, not necessary. That I will say you don't have to do. And in the real world, you wouldn't have had to do that either in this car or basically any other car with a sequential locks like this. Where it differs mostly from a modern semi-automatic sequential gearbox is that it's not computer controlled. When the driver pulled that lever, he was physically swapping cogs around. He was moving the selector barrel around via shift fork, and then, of course, the selector barrel had its own shift forks attached to the gears themselves to move them around on the shafts and counter shafts in the gearbox. But you're not having a hydraulic assist in that shift. You're not having the ECU looking at all the parameters to figure out where the clutch should cut back in for the clearest and cleanest gear change. You don't have the ECU blipping the throttles or anything like that, so a lot of it is still falling on the driver. The only thing the sequential shift really got rid of was the ability to miss a gear. Starting to get some more understeer creeping in here as we have started to wear these tires a little bit. Yep, a lot of it there. But, you know, just drive to what the car is telling you. If it doesn't like such a hard turn in, well, don't give it such a hard turn in. It does like a short shift into fourth here for the carousel. Just wait for the front end to quiet down and get back hard into the power. Drive it to the exit. And then enjoy the kink. Brakes are real good. Once they come up, they grab nicely. They're pretty linear in terms of their feedback. They will lock. Of course, no ABS. And this car's got a lot of downforce, so cadence braking is your friend, meaning that as the speed drops, you come off of the pedal because the downforce squares with speed, which means it has the inverse square with speed when the speed drops. You have a lot of grip at the start of the braking zone, but it starts to tail off pretty quickly, directly proportional to your speed through the air as you decelerate. So just be aware of that. If you're experienced in open wheelers, you know all about this. You can start to get rear locking as the weight transfer starts to happen. The front will tend to lock first, which is good. Of course, if you play with your brake bias, you can change that proclivity from front to rear. So if you set a lot of brake bias to the rear, just buyer beware on that one. Rear axle's starting to misbehave a little bit there. Hard back into the power. Lots of usable power in the torque band on this engine. Maximum power is coming basically at the top of the rev range, as you would expect on a high-strung race engine like this. But really, all through the working rev range, there is power that is usable. There are no real dead spots, and there are no real high spots either, apart from the very top end of the range, right up around 7,800 RPM. You can get hard back into the gas at mid-range, not a problem. Of course, in the lower gears, watch out, because you will get wheel spin if you're not careful. But very tractable, very compliant, very predictable as well. Really no nasty surprises from this engine. It's very smooth, and it gives you what you would expect. Fuel light at 10 liters, as expected. A little bit of left front locking there. Or not quite locking, but just some underspeed on the wheel. Expect that with weight transfer. Going into a left-hand corner like that, the weight transfers over to the right. Let's hug the inside, wait for the front end to grip up, and then head back into it. Take the kink flat. And now we'll back off because there's one other thing that I want to show you about this car. This is something that VRC already know about, and as far as I'm aware, they are planning to do something about it in a subsequent update. However, you'll notice that if we do a hard launch, there's an interesting characteristic about the gearbox, and I think it's an error rather than a feature. However, it's a useful error because notice, punch up first gear as normal. You got the clutch in. You can raise the revs, you know, and then you'll be going. However, if you use the clutch on that initial upshift out of first gear, watch what happens. Didn't quite do it there. However, perhaps we'll try it again. Yeah, kind of there. There is a thing where you get not rev hang, but almost clutch hang, where it will sort of implement its own little launch control map, and you will start to pull away and gain a lot of acceleration with the engine at a constant speed and not spinning the wheels, basically like launch control. And it's useful on a standing starter course, but not something this car would have done to the best of my knowledge. There it is. Yep, you see it just held the revs at around 73, 7400. We didn't spin the wheels at all at full throttle, and we just accelerated. That's something that should not be happening. Again, it's useful, but it's not quite authentic. VRC do know about that, and again, I believe it's something that they are planning to update in a subsequent patch. But as of the time of recording this, they have not so done yet. Back into the pits here. Just get an overall sense of what this thing looks like out on track. Real cool. I like all of that. All the details that you saw in the showroom are here, and now they are brought to life. Really, really do like all of that immensely, as you would expect. Cool. Here in the natural light, no pixelation, no real issues here detail-wise. A couple pixely bits on some parts of the livery, but who cares? You're never going to be this close to see that anyway. You pull out even a little bit and everything looks crisp and clean, so no problems with any of that. I do like all of that. There's your refueling nozzles there, and also believe an air nozzle for the air jacks. Get another one of those back here, too. Real cool. Real cool. What was our lap time on that run in terms of our best lap? We did... What did we do? Find our lap time. There we go. Nope, that's the tire screen. There's a lap time. 1:54.311 was our best lap on that run. What does it do when we load in a setup that I like a little bit better? Soft tires. Put in enough for 6 laps or so. We'll add some more dive planes. Take out a little bit of rear wing. And the big thing, the diff. Open it up entirely. Otherwise, not really changing anything suspension-wise. Just a little bit more front downforce. We're going to keep the louvers in place. Head back into the cockpit and we'll see what it does. Obviously no clock in the car, and I don't want to put it up here on screen because it just clutters things a little bit too much for my liking. But we'll see what we do after a handful of laps. Again, tire's stone cold, so we'll see. But already on the softs, even though they have gone 1 corner so far, already more grip on the front end. Let's get those tires working. No better way to do that than this corner right here. Is the kink flat already? It might be. Yep. A little bit more squirrely now that we've taken out some rear wing. On the brakes. Brakes already nice and warm. How are the tires? Great. They're ready to go. All right, let's see what it does on some maximum attack. A little bit swirly. Control the slide. When it does break free, it tends to break free on all 4 corners at once, so that's helpful. And the whole car just tends to plow wide in a big 4-wheel drift situation. Very nicely controllable. A little bit of a braking situation on my end. Trying to push them harder than they're ready for yet. Understeer, just deal with that. Get hard back into the gas. Nice. Brakes. Little bit of oversteer starting to set in there in the transition between the brakes and throttle. Let's deal with that as best you can. There we go. We got it stopped that time. And stop for this corner is always a little bit trickier. Carousel, little steering corrections, mostly just throttle application though through there. Very nice. Brakes. Gear a little wide of the apex. Pick up the throttle. Third gear. Let it drift in, let it drift out, hard into the gas. Enjoy the launch down the straight. There we go. We will see what the lap time was when we get back into the pits. Third gear through turn one seems to be a little bit more compliant. Get a little bit more engine braking to get it slowed down and turned in. Sun going behind some clouds here. Track temperature will be dropping a little bit. Here we go. We got 6 liters of gas left, so that means we had better head back in before we get stuck out here. Start to cool the car a little bit. back into the pits with us. Cool, cool. Well, there it is, the VRC Beamer V12. Real cool car. Real cool car. Real glad that we have this now. It was something that we desperately needed. 152.549 was our best lap on that run. Like that a lot. And there it is. Little marker lights there showing that we're in the pit lane with the limiter up there. Same thing on the rear. Cool stuff. Real cool stuff. One thing that I will note in terms of the visual details that you'll see from replays, the brake glow. Obviously, when the brakes get hot, you're applying them, you are going to start to get some glowing through the brake calipers and the rotors in particular. That does happen. It's just that the temperature range at which that occurs is a bit different than you might expect from some other cars and some other mods that you'll have seen. However, it does happen. You just got to get the brakes real hot before it does happen. So you'll see that. You might not see it on the hot lap replays that I'm about to show you, but you will see that in your own running, particularly in dimmer lighting conditions. So that's all really cool. And you're going to see that on some of the replays that I've already published and others that I will publish in due course, I am sure. But other than that, pretty standard run-of-the-mill visuals that you're going to get from replays and other situations from this mod. And all in all, it is an absolutely great one. Like to drive it. The only bug is that gearbox thing where it kind of behaves a little bit like launch control or a CVT, depending on the situation. But it does work very nicely. It's a very useful bug, but I do believe that they are going to fix that. But it's pretty useful for standing starts, particularly in the second phase of the getaway as you go along. But that's about that in terms of the VRC Beamer V12. I do have hot lap replays that are coming in, and you'll see them next, so you can hear this glorious engine without me barking all over the place over it. But there it was. Excellent job once again by VRC. When they bring us a new product, they bring us a really cool one at that, and it's great to see this car finally being added to Assetto Corsa. Stay tuned for the hot laps, everyone. Ferrari Bound 601 saying thank you all very much for watching, and of course, we will see you soon.